Well, welcome everybody. We're just waiting for our guest, Sandro Olivieri. We'll get started in a minute. There you are. Welcome, Sandro. Thanks so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
So welcome everybody else. I'm Kevin Duggan. I'm the Director of Development here at Games for Change, and I've been moderating these Meet the Thunder sessions, which are great opportunities to hear from folks that are doing really great work to support game developers and others. And one thing I've sort of been hearing today in sessions today is that even though this is called the Meet the Thunder track, there's many ways that game developers, creatives, and companies can be supported, and that was true in several of the earlier sessions. Different ways that folks need support, and we'll be talking about that a little bit today. These sessions are half an hour. They're short, so we like to keep it to a brief presentation, and then plenty of time for question and answers. So I will ask you to hold your questions, and then after the presentation, please post them to the chat, and then we'll have a conversation. So let me introduce Sandro Olivieri, our guest. And Sandro was here last year talking about his role at ATT Aspire Accelerator. He's here today focusing more on a new project FoundED. And Sandro is a strategy consultant who has dedicated his career to helping impact investors innovate on their investment strategies while keeping a focus on impact. And I think I'll leave it at that and just hand it over to Sandro, who will make a brief presentation. And again, we'll have a conversation.
Thanks, Kevin. Happy to be here again this year. Like I said, I will talk about the Aspire Accelerator. If folks are interested, I'm going to focus on a new project we're working on called Project FoundED. Good to see some familiar names in the audience already. I see Frank, good to see you. I think we met here last year. And Holly, good to see you in there as well. Always happy to see new faces as well. So I'll get into my presentation, and then we can take as many questions as you'd like about Aspire or FoundED or anything really. So I'll get into it. Let's see here. Is that visible to everybody? I'm going to guess yes, unless somebody stops me. So I wanted to talk to you guys about Project FoundED. What it is essentially is a nonprofit that tries to make the EdTech industry a little bit easier to navigate. We provide resources to help EdTech companies that are impactful rise to the top. And we really hope to highlight the immense passion, the wins, and just as importantly, to sort of convene folks around solutions to the inefficiencies, the pitfalls, and frankly, the funding needs. So the origin story of this is my partner, Amy, and I, who, as Kevin said, we're strategy consultants in the impact space, and we worked for lots of folks in education. We just ended up having most of our clients be in the education technology space, so we focused there ever since. And through all that work, we've been co-pilots on a lot of EdTech journeys. We've been doing this for 7 years. And what we've learned is that when you accelerate an EdTech company, there's just so many things going on that could make the journey sort of easier or harder. The background of its founder. You could be a researcher at a higher ed institution. You could be a teacher. You could be a student. You could be a parent. You could be anybody. Everybody has lived experience in EdTech, so anybody could be an EdTech founder. And the fact that you're coming in from different backgrounds is one of the best things about EdTech, and can be one of the hardest when you're building an EdTech company. One of the other things that can make things harder or easier is the state you happen to live in. Because EdTech founders could be anyone, anywhere, it might be that you are in San Francisco, California, where there happens to be a lot of EdTech infrastructure and startup infrastructure generally. It makes it easier to meet other people, find funding, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're in Boise, Idaho, where there's just less of a startup ecosystem. It's just generally harder. Your ideas are no less impactful, though, and we need to be able to figure out how to support them. The maturity of the sector that they operate in, be it early childhood or distance learning, as we've seen over the past year, et cetera, it depends on what sector you're operating in. And unfortunately, still today, the founder's gender and their race plays a role. How did we get here? About a year ago, more than a year ago now, in March of 2020, when school closures started to look like they were going to happen, we really felt in our bones that this was not going to be as good for the EdTech industry as a lot of the headlines we were seeing were making it out, right? We were seeing a lot of headlines saying, this is it. This is what we've been waiting for, the golden age of EdTech. We got distance learning. We've been investing in this space. We got this. We weren't sure that was going to be true for most of the EdTech companies that were out there, but we didn't know. And so we distributed a questionnaire to as many EdTech founders as we could reach to start tracking the effects of school closures. And we found a lot of stuff that was not all sunshines and rainbows, right? 67% of the folks that we surveyed, we got responses from over 100 different EdTech founders, 67% of which had 6 months of runway or less heading into a summer where investment had dried up, school budgets had essentially frozen, and headed into the summer, which is not a great time for EdTech to start and figure out how do I get more money in the door. And so some of the other things we saw is that if you were already well set up for distance learning, there was a lot of pickup in usage, new users, et cetera. But that came with increased costs in internet infrastructure, customer success roles that you had to hire for, et cetera. And a time when almost everybody that we surveyed was offering a deep discount on their products heading into COVID, because everybody had this sense of responsibility that they had to meet the moment by making their products more accessible, making it free in lots of cases. So we had this situation where you're offering your product for free and getting more users, but your costs were rising and you weren't making any new money. And for those that weren't set up for distance learning, you were having canceled purchase orders, less money available to you generally, either through schools or investors. So it was not a great situation. And so the things that we were writing resonated. We got written up in places like the Hechinger Report, the New York Times, and all these places, which felt fine for about a day. But then it really made us start to ask ourselves, why did we have to do this? Why didn't this exist already? Who represents the voice of the EdTech entrepreneur and highlights their challenges? There's so many things that only the EdTech entrepreneur really can see. And that is to see the EdTech industry and what it takes to build an impactful EdTech business. And the EdTech entrepreneur is really the only one that sees it from end to end, like what it takes to implement in a classroom, what it takes to build a tool that can be impactful, that measures impact, what it takes to raise money in that space, what it takes to get mind share, what marketing works and doesn't work more often than not. And so we realized that it just didn't exist. There are small communities of EdTech founders out there. If you were part of an accelerator program or you're in the portfolio of a different investor, et cetera. But there is no larger, broader ecosystem for EdTech founders. There are things like ISTE and to a certain extent, things like COSIN and things like that. But they're not really set up to serve EdTech founders and ultimately help to improve the EdTech industry by elevating the voice of the founders. So we knew we had to build it. One of the things I will say is, and we found out pretty quickly because we talked to everybody, investors, foundations, we talked to schools, is that, we have an industry that is not set up to achieve equitable learning outcomes. And I think we're actually getting further and further from it after this past year. We don't think they're bad actors though, right? We have our investors over here whose job it is to just take somebody's money and make it into more money. And they are doing that, right? And ultimately, private investment like this is necessary to make any tech market run. And so we are happy that they are choosing education to put their money in, and that needs to be a part of our ecosystem. And so they're doing their job. There's just not enough of them. Foundations during pandemic times have really focused on on lower order Maslow's hierarchy of need things like security and access and stuff, and good. That's what we need them to do. They were able to do that quickly and really help a lot of communities out. Schools themselves still aren't in a situation where they have to purchase technology for any given situation. They did last year when they were in distance learning. Now, whether they're going back to school full time, maybe not. They're focusing on the wellness of their teachers and what they need in the classroom, et cetera. And that's a good thing to do, right? They have so many things to worry about. They are not thinking about what EdTech should I be using in any given situation all the time. And so everybody's focused on impact in education in one way or another. And so there's no bad actors. But when you take everybody's actions together and say, okay, well, given we're all doing good things, does this add up to leveraging technology to achieve more equitable outcomes for our kids? I think the answer is unfortunately no, but nobody's telling that story. We're incredibly inefficient from an outcomes perspective. The business models that favor, that are being invested in today, especially through last year, are things that, because selling to schools is very slow and you can't make money that way, a lot of the business models that are invested in are direct to consumer, which are just fundamentally inequitable. To say, okay, well, the best educational products that are out there, are the most accessible ones, are only the ones that can be afforded by families that can pay for it, right? And so there's a fundamental inequality to direct to consumer educational products. And so we're sort of favoring business models that sort of work outside of the schools, which is really our only mechanism to equitably implement education technology, which we've known about for a long time, right? Is why we purchase textbooks district-wide, et cetera. So we have a situation where the best products don't win, the ones that make the most money do, which there is a correlation between making the most money and achieving some educational outcome. I don't know what it is, but it's not perfect. What I wish were the situation, I'm sure we all would, is that we would work in an EdTech market where the companies that make the most money are also the most impactful. And the only way that we know how to do that is really by raising up the problem to folks that might have bigger audiences and deeper pockets than we do, and convene around solutions to those problems. So how do we do that? We're starting by creating this community of EdTech founders. We're already, I think, 500 have signed up on the website. We have 300 active members in our Slack community. And what we really hope to do is, through that community, surface a lot of things. We surface a lot of opportunities through there for funding, for exposure, for partnership. It's really become a sort of public accelerator of sorts for EdTech founders, where they're just communicating with each other, helping each other out, partnership, et cetera. And then every once in a while, what we do is we gather data from those founders and sort of put that together in a way that we hope can influence investors, foundations, schools to pay attention to a problem area or make further investments in areas that we identify as gaps. So it goes without saying that we never share anybody's individual data with anyone. We sort of aggregate everything. That is the entire point of what we do, is to aggregate and anonymize the data so that we can make a case for true systems change in the EdTech industry. So that's my spiel about Project FoundED. We're live now at projectfounded.org. Come and sign up. There's a bunch of us in there, and it's a good time if you haven't signed up already. And that's my thing. You can reach me directly or just go to the website and you can sign up.
Great, thank you. There's that infinity effect. So Eric is asking, is there a link to the Slack community for those who wish to engage? I'm assuming there's a process to join, and then you...
Yeah, just sign up on the website, and then you'll get the invite right away. There's just a couple demographics questions that we asked to get in.
She's asking if you can share a link here. Is that possible in the chat?
Sure. I'll share it in the chat. Yeah.
So this community, there's an active community, 300 companies or folks. how is this like a moderated network? What's the glue that holds everybody together and moves them forward? So I understand that the data collection is probably the most formal aspect of this, but who sets the agenda? Or is it just maybe go in a little more detail about that?
I'm going to give you the cheesiest answer I can. The glue that holds it all together is the fact that we're all there to educate our kids. And I'm not, I am a sentimental person, but I honestly believe that that's true. I have yet to find a entrepreneur that I've helped throughout my 7 years that won't help another ed tech entrepreneur out, even if they're in the competitive space. I just haven't met them. Competition is not something that rises to the top of the list of things that matter, right? Because for the most part, we are still, every single one of us, competing against non-consumption of our product. Typically, we're competing against paper and pencil, right? From an investor's point of view, you'll hear them talk a lot about how, supplemental learning resources is a saturated market and there's too many of us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe from an investment perspective, but when you are an individual creating a business in that space, there's so much room for you to expand because schools typically are maybe not buying any ed tech in middle school math, honestly, right? There might be a whole bunch of middle school math folks out there, but it takes so long to build sales and traction that competition doesn't really matter yet. It just doesn't. And so the thing that holds us all together is this common sense that we are creating impactful technologies to help bring about more equitable outcomes for our kids. And so the agenda is set by the community itself and the passion that drives them to do that. We do some things like we've started an event series and members will have access to the recordings of these events, but we've done events in understanding CARE and ESSER funds for EdTech and what you can access from the federal funded programs. We've done events in barriers to innovating in EdTech. So we had the founder of Clever, we had the founder of Fiveable, and we had one of the chief experience officer of Schmoop, just talking about like what, the barriers that they encountered as they brought innovative solutions to market and how they overcame them. We try to be as biased towards action as possible, as biased towards solution as possible. And we're having one on Wednesday on the state of EdTech funding with a focus on M&A activity. And so all of our content really is geared towards EdTech founders specifically. That is totally free right now. It's open to all, but the recordings will be available to members. Membership is $0.00. I am on record as saying I will never charge an EdTech founder for a single thing. That is not what this is about. I will figure out how to fundraise for this separately, and I've already got a couple of funders lined up. So I'm here for the EdTech founders.
Right. I think you noted at the beginning that you're a not-for-profit corporation, right? So there's the community building piece of it, sort of community support, and then there's the more of an advocacy role, and I think that's where you collect the data and you're really using to try and influence the sort of stakeholder sectors that you mentioned, investors, foundations, and the schools themselves. So just talk a little bit more about that advocacy piece of it. How do you get the information in front of decision makers and influencers and policy folks? And what is the message? What does it tend to be?
So I'm not sure. I go back and forth on whether or not we will, our community is now just 3 months old, right? I go back and forth on whether or not I should be chasing after folks like policymakers. In the meantime, I think there's so much progress that can be made just pooling together investors, foundations, and schools that I don't have to start sort of influencing policymakers just yet. I think there's so much money and potential locked up in just getting those big three buckets, investors, foundations, and schools, to agree to an outcome, essentially. It's like what we actually want to see. The outcome of our actions needs to be equitable learning outcomes. And deciding how we get there, or at least convening to talk about it, or making a pledge to strive to reach for it, I think there's a lot of runway there. Ultimately, there's just nobody talking about this, right? There are investors that talk to each other over here. There are foundations that generally don't talk to each other but are doing their thing over here. And schools the same way. And so there's nobody sort of going across and trying to convene everybody. We haven't really convened everybody yet, but through our 7 years working in EdTech, we've gotten to know just about everybody, from the national nonprofits to the investors to the foundations. And we're starting to get to know the schools, school districts, et cetera. So more to come on how we're going to start convening those folks around solutions, but that's where we are today.
So Holly asks for a little more information about the data. So can you talk a little bit about the kinds of data that you're collecting, and what kinds of trends is that revealing that can be meaningful to your membership?
Holly, thanks for the question. Not surprised that question's coming from you. It is revealing some things that I think we all suspected, and some things that are just maybe worse than we thought. One of the interesting things for me is that you can always imagine startup ecosystems being sort of a funnel, right? You have early stage companies appear, some of them don't make it, and they become pre-seed companies, seed companies, Series A companies, right? Not every company that starts will ultimately make it to a Series A investment. This just makes sense. What we're finding is that this is such a shallow funnel. It is a huge number of bootstrapped companies in EdTech. Just a huge, huge, huge number. And I think that's a function of lots of things. Anyone, anywhere could be an EdTech founder, like we talked about earlier. But the interesting thing is, in that huge funnel, the bootstrap companies, there's several multi-million-dollar companies in there, or at least companies that are making multi-million dollars in revenue a year, right? And that can be indicative of lots of things, but I think one of the things that it's indicative of is that investment is not guaranteed in this space. There's not enough private investment dollars in K through 12, especially, to ever hope that you will be successful in fundraising. So lots of people just go out there and work on sales and revenue, which is my advice to everybody, and make it that way, because it's all hustle, right? Selling school to school is a hustle. It's just a daily grind, and you got to go do it. And so that's one of the things we found. The other thing that I think we're finding / confirming, unfortunately, is that investment dollars are not flowing to female founders and founders of color in the same way. I mean, it is flowing in the same way that it does in other tech sectors, in that it just doesn't. And so we're finding that to be true as well. And
are you only talking about sort of a domestic U.S. community? Does this extend internationally, and are there is there common ground even outside the U.S.?
It is our bias right now, because I think the majority of our membership is, let's say 85% is US based. And I think a little less than 70% are focused on K-12. So our bias tends to be US based K-12. But we have membership in higher ed. There's lots of interesting higher ed conversations in the Slack community, as well as early childhood, lifelong learning, and about 15% international that we're finding so much commonality with, right? It turns out it's crappy sales cycles across the world. So everybody is finding camaraderie in some way or another.
Like it's misery loves company or something.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've talked to folks in Singapore, in South Africa, in the Middle East and North Africa region as well, that it's the same story everywhere. Selling to schools is hard. There's not any really good convening functions. It's just, it's a struggle.
Are you continuing sort of the advocacy in the press? I mean, so, it seemed like you had good early response to the story that you were telling, and it sounds like you're continuing to learn more, and you're going to surface probably interesting case studies and, again, commonalities. Is this something that you really are pushing out into the press to sort of generate visibility?
We haven't yet, at least not pitched press on anything. I am putting together a few talks for, now that we're doing in-person conferences again, I guess, for some of the stuff coming up. I'll be at ASU GSB. We'll have a session there. and pitching a couple of moderated panels at South by for next year. But not pitching press just yet. It's not necessarily our interest right now to be, the only audience I care about right now, for example, is EdTech founders. If there was a news outlet outside of EdSurge that was only for EdTech founders, that's where I would go. It doesn't exist.
So really, these are early days, and it's really talking amongst yourselves or ourselves or themselves.
Yes, but ourselves is getting bigger and bigger every day.
That's great. So we only have a few minutes left. Do you want to give just a quick overview of the accelerator and your work with Aspire?
Sure. So the AT&T Aspire Accelerator is a program run by the AT&T Foundation that is interested in K through 12 EdTech. And in this year, we just kicked off our most recent cohort, and will likely, if history is precedent, we will kick off a new cohort in January, or kick off the application period in January for a new cohort. This past year, and I expect next year as well, AT&T is really focused on technologies that help alleviate issues arising from digital divide. They've made I think it's a $2 billion commitment over the next 3 years to digital divide causes, getting hotspots out there, making more affordable access, turning up community centers with access, et cetera. So really working on the infrastructure piece. The accelerator is finding those high quality tools, educational tools, that we can then push through those pipes and say, hey, now that you've got this newfound connectivity, this is a great tool that will help improve your educational outcomes. Period. And so it's a great program. I designed it 8 years ago. It is extremely flexible. We've been virtual from day one. We've never sort of made anybody move anywhere because of the same truths that we talked about before. You could be anywhere as an EdTech founder. You likely have kids. In fact, I think the count is up to nine different babies being born during our EdTech sessions. So we're extremely friendly from that perspective, and I think it's really important. And as such, we've really sort of helped open the door to what is unfortunately non-traditional entrepreneurs. I mean, we are at 72% of our founders being female entrepreneurs, and 52% being founders of color, and 35% of the total being Black founders in particular, which we've always been proud of. And so it's a great program that comes with $100,000 worth of investment. I should say that up front. This might be the most important feature of the program is $100,000 worth of investment. And then each company is supported individually. So there's no set curriculum for everybody at large. We don't do like, hey, now that everybody's here, let's do Design Thinking 101 or EdTech Sales 101. We assume that you all have different expertises, and we don't want to waste anybody's time. And so we deal with each company individually to create an acceleration program for each one as they come into the program. So that looks like talking to me and my partner Amy on a weekly basis, sometimes bi-weekly basis, to just get to understand your business, your opportunities, and then we start organizing our resources and our expertise to go to work for you for 6 months, essentially. So it's a fully customized program for each of the participants in the cohort. Cohorts are 8 companies. Typically, this year it's 4 for-profits and 4 nonprofits. It's been 5 and 3 in the past. No hard and fast rule. They're really just looking for impact.
And do you have to graduate from the program at a set time, or can you be part of the program on an ongoing basis, or to make room for the next cohort, or how does that work?
Yes, everybody graduates at the same time. This year it will be in early December. I don't believe really in demo days. Demo days are useful for very specific things, and when you're chasing after impact, they tend not to be very useful. So what we do is we do a sort of more community center based event at the end where we try and give back to the communities we're trying to serve, and help AT&T, in AT&T's case, AT&T employees sort of get engaged with these products and maybe advocate for them at their school or use them with their kids if they're direct to consumer. And so there is a graduation period, and then we continue to support afterwards, not monetarily anymore, but when AT&T sponsors a conference in education, we reserve some spots for our alumni companies. We try and help get people on stages and in front of more audiences. We're still in contact with every single one of our alumni from 2015 till today. So it's a good way. It's a growing and sort of incredible and inspiring community.
Great. Well, on that note, on that positive note, that is all the time we have for this session today. So I want to thank you, Sandro, for making the time to be with us. If folks want to direct message you through the people function in Hopin, can they do that, or is there another way to reach you?
That's just to email me directly, which is fine.
Okay, you want to drop that in the chat?
And Jonathan, your question came in late, but I can respond to that too if you want to reach out.
So again, thanks, Sandra. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you join us again tomorrow. This is the last of our Meet the Funder sessions for today, but we have a bunch more coming up in the next 2 days. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.